think there's going to be several terms I'm going to use here. Again, this is, I haven't taught this, I've taught this, but not in this way before. So these notes I wrote last week, just for you guys. But you're the, you know, you're the guinea pigs. I'm testing on you. So it may not be all that good, but we'll see what we can get. But I want you to think about multi-church. And here's a multi-church. It's a church that started other churches. So a level 4 church would be a multi-church. A level 5 church would be a better multi-church. Okay? Here's a micro-church. A micro-church is a church between 7 and 30 people. And I think if we really want to win the world, and I'm talking about, I actually think it's easier to start big churches in other countries than it is in Western Europe or the United States. Because the tide has turned against Christianity. The gospel is growing. You get this. In the past 25 years, the only 2 places where Christianity didn't grow were Japan and the United States. We knew that Japan was shrinking, and we knew the United States was stable. Now the United States is growing a little bit, but it's not keeping up to the population, so the percentage is shrinking. The other 2 countries now where Christianity is shrinking are Iraq and Syria, and it's because of ISIS. They're killing Christians, and Christians are running away from the countries. In a way, that's very good, because they're coming to Europe and they're bringing the gospel. How many of you were born outside of England? Raise your hands. Now hold them up. Oh my gosh. Wait. Oh my goodness. You guys are evidence of what I'm preaching around the world. I'm taking your picture.
Okay, put your hands up.
Put your hands up real, camera, okay, real high if you were born outside of England. In fact, stand. Okay. Again, look at me, you look like you think I'm intelligent.
98. You don't look very intelligent.
Okay, now sit back down and raise your hands, because I want to make sure this works one way or another. Okay, raise your hands real high if you're born outside the United States.
Raise your hands.
I mean outside of England.
United States?
Now I'm trying to look. If you were born outside of England, raise your hand. One more.
Let me know, you know.
You guys understand this. You're the salvation of Europe. You're the Apostle Paul in reverse. Am I wrong or am I right? You people are re-Christianizing a continent that used to be known for sending missionaries. The biggest missionary sending church in the world right now is the United States. Okay? The number 2 is Nigeria. I met a pastor. He's driving a taxi cab in Washington, D.C., and I know how to take taxis in Asia, but I never did it in America before. So a few years ago, I got a taxi in D.C., and I just read this book about church growth in Nigeria, and so I'm standing there where you get the taxi, and as soon as I get there, the guy comes, screeches to a stop, and I get in, and I go, that was perfect timing. That must have been God, because I'm going to tell them about Jesus, right? So I'm in the back of the car, and he's kind of quiet, and I'm trying to get him to talk, and I notice he has an African accent, and I go, were you born in Africa? And he goes, yes, and I go, I noticed your accent. Where were you born? He goes, in Nigeria. And I go, oh, I'm very interested in Nigeria. I just read this really interesting book. It's called Out of Africa by Peter Wagner. And it talks about 11 huge churches that are all run by businessmen who are never going to quit their business because they're rich, for one thing, and they're pastoring these big churches. You know how to run a big business, you know how to run a big church. So anyhow, so I start telling them about this because I'm trying to figure out a way to get around. I can tell them about Jesus. Well, I had to stop in my hotel and get my suitcase because I had to fly to go to the airport. I was on vacation, but Foursquare had a business meeting in Los Angeles, so I had to fly to LA for 24 hours and come back. So he says, I'll wait for you at the hotel. And so I think he's being nice. I don't realize it's money, right? So I go, that's okay on one condition. And he goes, what? And I get to sit in the front seat with you. So I get back in the car, and he goes, because I've told my pastor, he goes, Pastor, I have a confession to make. I go, what is that? He goes, I too am a pastor. and he goes, and I had told him about this, what's it called? Redeem?
Yeah.
Okay, I told him about that church. And he goes, I have visited that church. And there are indeed that many people there. I counted the number of sections and the number of seats in a section. And there are indeed that many people. And then he goes, what I didn't tell you is that I was sent from that church as a missionary to the United States. And there are 150 of us on the east coast of the United States, all sent as missionaries from Nigeria to your country. And it's like, yeah, clap. Praise the Lord. So then, see, I grew up around Japanese people and black people. And so, when I was in high school, I was rejected by all the white kids. But the black kids loved me. And so they were my friends. So the racial thing is really, you know, I'm on thin ice always. So I want to find out more. And so I go, so what kind of people attend your church? Is it mostly people who came from Africa? And he goes, no, all kinds. And I go, well, does that mean African Americans? And I'm trying to, you know, the racial thing, I just don't want to, you know, I don't want to say, oh, there's that black person over there, or there's that Mexican person over there. I want to go, there's that guy in a yellow shirt, and there's that person in a red shirt. Or there's that tall man. I'm not going to say the other thing. And so I'm having to say the other thing. And basically what it comes down to is, there's all kind of people going to this guy's church. There's Asian people, a couple Chinese. There's white people. It's everything you would want in a church is happening. And this guy came from Africa. And I think that's the coolest thing in the whole world. But here's what I know, is that if you go to seminary, here's Japan Foursquare. They want to make a pastor. So he goes to college in Japan. I have two friends that did this. They graduate from college. One went to Tokyo University, which is like the Oxford of Japan. Then they go to America and they go to Life Bible College for 4 years. And then they go to Fuller Seminary for 3 years. So now they have 11 years of education, and the Foursquare Church paid for it all. And I've been going to Japan since 1986, and I've watched 2 people go through that process. 2. That's all they could afford, is 2. When I started going to Japan, they had 14 Foursquare churches. So if you can put only 2 people through the process to become a pastor, how are you going to replace them when they die? It's just not going to work. So we started sending people into Japan that we had just trained in our church. And they would all get a job teaching English or doing whatever, and they would start a church. And guess what? The Brazilians started sending people to Japan. And there's more people, Japanese people in Brazil, in the country, than there are in Tokyo, the city. So when I hear there's Brazilian Foursquare people going to Japan Foursquare, I thought they were all Japanese Brazilians. They weren't. They looked like him. And all of a sudden there's 45 churches in Japan. And in that same period of time, they produced exactly 2 pastors by using the seminary model. It is broken. It doesn't work. And what we really need, I believe, is we need to get in our head the idea that the growing edge of the church is smaller churches, because we know that most church planting in America is done by smaller churches. And we need to get in our head the idea, and not the idea that some people have of a house church is somehow spiritual, and if you meet in a big building, you're not spiritual. So if you want to start a house church, my friend Tom McCarthy was a doctor, and he started a house church, and he grew to 1,000 people. Let it grow. He never spent more than 8 hours a week on the church, including Sundays. He hired staff as it grew. When it hit 1,000, his wife told him, you have to choose between the church and medicine. Either one's fine with me, but you choose. He prayed. He decided to go with medicine. This was God. We sent the best person we could who took over the church. It shrank to 500, but it's healthy. It's planted churches in California, and recently they planted 30-some churches in Fiji. Tom, shortly after he left the church, they found he had a brain tumor, and he died. And it was far better that he had resigned from the church, and he slowly died. The church loved him to the end. It was wonderful. But it was far better that he had replaced himself when he was still healthy. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
So if a church wants to grow to 10,000, I don't care. Let it. But I know this, that every pastor has a ceiling. You know, when one of my friends was pastoring in Colorado, and their church had 300 people, and his assistant pastor split the church. And you know, he would have sent the guy out with money and people, but instead the guy got mad and took about 1/3 of the people away from the church. And so I was on my vacation, and this is before cell phones, and so I called my office, and they said, oh, your friend Sam Rockwell called, and his church just split, and he actually was crying on the telephone. So I called. I'm staying on a boat somebody loaned me. So I go up, and every day I go to the phone booth, put money in the phone booth, and call Sam. And every day for about 5 days in a row, all I'm saying is this one thing: do not get angry. Get up there and tell everybody, guess what? Our church had a baby this week. Aren't you glad? It was a surprise, but we gave birth. We started a new church. And you bless them, and you do this. Take an offering and give them the money. And if you do that, your church will heal. If you get up there and cry, or you get up there and get bitter and angry, your church will die. And so he did what I said, and now it's 300 people. They lose 100 people. 4 weeks later, they got 300 people. Oh, no, catch the logic of this, okay? I'm pastoring 300 people. Suddenly I'm only pastoring 200 people. In 3 weeks, 100 more come to my church. That's 50% growth from 200 to 300. Why didn't it keep growing? Why did it stop at 300? Because Sam knows how to pastor 300 people. I know how to pastor. I know how to very quickly pastor 1,600. I can start a church, and well, I used to. I'm getting old now, so it's harder for the young people to come. But it was very easy with the first 2 churches to grow to 1,600. And then after that, it was my ceiling. And it was only when I brought certain staff members in that we grew, and it only ever got up to 2,200. So that's my ability. It can't go beyond me. In both churches, at 2,200, I left, and the person after me grew to 2,400, both times, the same number. Interesting. So I think every pastor has a ceiling. I have a friend who they have planted. It's not a denomination, and it's not a church. It's a organization he created, to raise money to help people start churches. They planted 47 churches in 15 years. They spend $160,000 US to start one church. That is a lot of money. Okay, that's what, 130,000 pounds. One church grew to 600. A bunch of them, half a dozen or so, died, and most of them end up with 40 people in them. You're spending that much money to get 40 people in a church? Something is wrong with that. Something is really, really wrong with that. So what I want to teach you is this. If you choose to be a level 5, because that's what this is, I'm going to be a level 5 church. And how you get there is by saying so. That's why I had you talk to each other. I had to talk about, here's where my church is. Because when we became level 5 in Kaneohe, Hawaii, was when I stood on the beach and said, we're going to start a bunch of churches, and I can't do them all. And I can't disciple enough people. You're going to have to become pastors, and you're going to have to make disciples. That day, we are level 5. That's what that book, New to 5, is all about. How to teach your people that some of them have pastoral gifts, and they're going to pastor, and they're going to keep their job. Okay? So you become a multi-church by starting micro-churches, and if you start micro-churches, some of them are going to die. But most of them are not. Most of them, if you redefine success, 20 people who love the Lord and are sharing the Lord and starting another church, that's success. And then everything else is more success. So if it grows bigger, or if it multiplies more, and honestly, I'm more interested in rabbits than I am in elephants. So if we can multiply a lot of, because that's what they've done in Sri Lanka. And you know what? Exactly what I'm talking about happened here. He came to England not to be a pastor. He came here to take a job. And then he started a church. And then another church. And it's easy. It's really easy. Now, it's hard work. I know it's hard work. But if you learn Ephesians chapter 4, you know, there's a term, I think it's in the slideshow, but somebody changed the word pastor to the word shepherd. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Theologically?
Yes.
So then they can make a term, apest. A-P-E-S-T. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And this is beginning, in America they've taught for years that there's no such thing as apostles today. Now they're saying there's apostles. Who's the guy in the church who's always starting stuff? We'll send him out to start the church, and then teach him to raise somebody else up to pastor and go start another one. You know, hard work, but simple. So, as we get into this, I already told you this story, and it was an Alfa Romeo. It wasn't a BMW because he corrected me. And so I already told that story, so that's over. So here's our definitions in America. A mega church is 1,000 or more people. Some people are now saying a mega church is 2,000 people. A large church, we're going to say, is 500 to 1,000 people. A mid-sized church is 100 to 499 people. A small church is between 7 people. For some reason, it's almost any group will grow to 7 without you trying. It gets a little harder after that. In America, we found that a manager can easily manage up to 7 people. They call it span of control. If he gets beyond 7, you got to break it down into smaller groups. In Japan, it's different, because in Japan everybody does what they're told, and a manager can lead 100 people with span of control. But in America, it's only 7. So 7 to 99 is a small church. Now watch this. A micro church is between 7 and 30 people. So if we make this our goal, and we're going to start, how many in your lifetime. If you're 40 years old, how many micro churches do you think that you could start yourself? If you said, I don't need money because I have a job, so I'm not going to take any salary from the church. I'm going to start this thing, and as quick as I can, I'm going to hand it off to him, and I'm going to go down the street and I'm going to start another one. How many churches could you start? Now you begin to be a network. But if you taught him to go out and start a micro church, and he does it, pretty soon you become a movement. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And I'm a little crazy, right? So you just got to put up with me. I don't even know what you think, and I might get in a lot of trouble right now, but I didn't get in trouble for telling you that I was going to try and reach gay people with the Lord, so maybe I won't get in trouble for this one. I came up with this idea, and I'm mad because I found somebody else is already doing it. But I was talking to a pastor. I'm coaching a guy that I met, and I talked to him about every 2 months. We talk on the phone for an hour and a half. And he's in a little town in North Carolina, and it's a pretty traditional town. And he's having a hard time because he pastors a church that pays his salary. Church of about 150 people, but they're not evangelizing. All they are is they love the Lord, they love each other, it's healthy, all that. And he's going, how can I evangelize? How can I evangelize? And I go, well, have you ever thought of starting a micro church? Until we start talking about that. And I go, here's what I would do if I was you. And I can't do this in the gay community because they don't drink beer, they drink wine. Gay people drink wine, and they're into expensive, that's their thing, So I'm sure there's gay beer drinkers, but I don't know. But if I was going to go out and just start something new, then I would say this, that we're going to have, and I'd print this on a card. I'd print on a card what I told you earlier. No sermon, all opinions are welcome. We're going to ask these questions. We're going to assign some scripture, and I wouldn't even call it scripture. I'd say we're going to look at the wisdom of God, and I'd start with the book of Proverbs. So I would give them a list of scriptures about money, and then we're just going to ask these questions. What did you like? What did you not like? So that they know what they're coming into. They're not afraid. But here's what I would call it. Beer, Bible, and barbecue. And I would meet at Sunday afternoons, not Sunday mornings. And I would know that if I said the word beer, all the Christians who were legalistic wouldn't come. And I don't want them there. And all the non-Christians who don't like church, but are going, I want to meet this weirdo, would come. And it would be easy for people to say, come, just got to bring your own beer. And I would start a micro church, and I told this young pastor this, and he goes, I can't believe it. That's the best. This whole phone call was worth what you just said. And I go, well, wait, will you get in trouble with your elders? Because he's in a traditional church. And he goes, no, those guys will let me do this. And I go, well, do it yourself and tell the elders, don't come. Because they'll wreck it. You want a bunch of non-Christians who cuss and swear and maybe get drunk at your church. Who cares? Get them saved. And then teach them that they can work in the coal mine or whatever and go do the same thing, and we can change the face of America. Am I making sense? Yeah. Here's American history. I wrote a book on this. I don't remember the name of the book, but in the history of America, if you were in what we call the Episcopal Church, which is the Church of England, in the early colonies, you had to have the equivalent, what they called seminary, which is like the equivalent of a junior high school education plus a little Bible school to become a pastor. If you were a Methodist, you got saved, some guy started to disciple you, you moved into the home of a pastor of a city church. And cities would be like 10,000 people, right? Early days of America. And your job is to be a circuit rider. Well, that doesn't mean that you're the preacher in every town. You may have 5 churches. that you oversee. So you ride on your horse between cities, and you're in this town this Sunday, and that town that Sunday, and that town that Sunday. You do 5 cities, and you come back to the mother church for 1 week, and then you go and do the whole thing all over again. What's happening is really you're an apostle. Because you got a church started, but somebody else is running it for the other 5 weeks that you're not there. And that's how the Methodists got started. But you had to go to college, or you couldn't be a Methodist pastor. And the other thing that happened with the circuit riders was they got to borrow the library of the preacher, and while they're riding their horse, which is walking, they're reading, they're getting a theological education by reading books. And if the pastor is lucky, the old guy, then this young guy's going to marry his ugly daughter. We're great. If you're a Baptist, and this was, I'm not saying this is what's in the history books, and it's mockery. They're making fun of the Baptists. If you're a Baptist, you get converted, that's the words that the non-Christian Jews, you get converted, they hand you a Bible and tell you to go start a church. Well, guess what? There's far more Methodist churches in America than there are Episcopal churches. And there's far more Baptist churches than there are Methodist churches. And here's what sociologists who are not Christians can say, is the more theological education that you're required, the fewer churches and the fewer Christians are in a community. The lower we lower that threshold of getting into the ministry, the more churches, and the more churches means more Christians, more people getting born again. And if you believe in the power of God, then that counts for something. If you don't believe in the power of God, then all we're doing is teaching a philosophy. But if you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, then the kind of stuff that he inherited from Leslie Kegel in Sri Lanka can happen here. And it can happen to you. And so, this thing here, to me, is the gold mine. And I know full well that if this gets going, then some of these churches are going to get to here. Here's what we know. This is the hardest place to be because of that financial struggle. However, if you're managing a real estate firm, or you have a life insurance business, or you have a job in the bus company, you can go from here to here and you don't struggle. Because nobody has to pay you a salary. All you're going to ever have to do to get to here is rent someplace on the weekend for church. Make sense? I have a friend in Japan who is pastoring, actually he's up here, he's pastoring 200 people, which is a huge church in Japan. They have 2 services on Sunday morning, and I've been begging him, I had to beg him to go to 2, and as soon as he went to 2, he's a very gifted person. Suddenly it filled up. Within 3 weeks, there's 100 more people in church. The room will hold 100. So now, he's always complaining that they don't have any money. They pay his salary and they pay rent on a ballet dancing studio on Sunday, but they don't have any money. He won't teach tithing. So I'm pounding on him to teach about tithing, and he's beginning to do that after 11 years. And so I've been pounding on him forever about, you need to start another church. He's finally going to. His problem is this. He's like a superstar. He's handsome. He's musical. He's funny. He's everything that I'm not. Okay? And he's looking for the next. His name is Fumi. He's looking for the next Fumi. Well, there isn't one. And so I'm there, and I'm telling them this thing from. You guys play cricket, but we play baseball, right? That if the guy who won more of what we call the World Series as a player is also called the strikeout king of baseball. His name is Reggie Jackson. He swung and missed more times than any player in history of American baseball. But he hit more home runs. They call him Mr. October. October is when they play the World Series. You know, in America, we have world champions of everything, right?
Yeah.
Nobody else plays American football, but we have the world champions of American football. And so they won more World Series with Reggie Jackson hitting the ball, but for every time he hit the ball, 4 times he struck out for every home run he hit. And so I'm telling my friend Fumi, look, you got to strike out. In other words, you got to believe in some guys who are going to fail, or you're never going to ever get anywhere. If you don't swing the bat, you're not going to get home run. My friend sits there and says, yeah, but you don't win baseball games off of home runs. You win baseball games after guys who, 4 bases in baseball? You win baseball games from guys who can hit singles. Because if they don't get on base, they're not going to get around. And the more that you can hit singles. And Fumi does this. He's got one of those yellow legal pads, and he writes 1 to 10. And at the top 10, he writes home run. And then at the bottom, where it says number 1, he writes strikeout. And then in between, he writes singles and doubles. In other words, they hit a single or they hit a double. And I go, the only thing wrong with that is you better put 2 strikeouts, not 1. And he went for it. And he planted a church. Or they're starting in this October. They're going to start a church. So he's up here and he's still struggling over money. But if he just actually throws off another service, he's going to get past that. But if you got the guy with the job and he keeps the job, what's the church in Nigeria? What's it called?
Redeemed Christian Church of God.
Redeemed Christian Church of God. Okay? That guy's got a job and he's pastoring over 100,000 people. And they've got 3,000 missionaries around the world. And it starts with this. It starts with this. And anybody can do this. So, here's U.S. church attendance. This is important that you understand this. A mega church, 1,000 plus people. We have 7,000 of those in the United States. We know there's 7,210. And this actually was a survey done by some non-Christians who are very good at surveys. So this is good data. That 2% of all the Christians in America attend mega churches. So whenever you go to Amazon or wherever and you look at Christian books, they're almost all written by the pastors of mega churches, but they only account for 2% of all the Christians in the country. So tell me what's successful about that. Not very much. You go to large churches, between 500 and 999, there's 12,000 of those in America, 4% of the Christians. So churches above 500 equal 6% of all the Christians in the United States. And again, that may be nice to be a pastor of a church that size. In fact, we find that these guys usually have pretty much the easiest life. These guys are pretty busy. These guys get paid pretty good. They got it made. But you get down here between 100 and 499, 35% of the people in America go to churches that size. But look at this. Between 7 and 99 people, or 59% of the Christians in America are going to small churches. What do you think pleases God? Well, on the one hand, it all pleases God. But on the other hand, this has got to be the thing that's the most productive is the small church, the most productive. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Again, if you write to me and ask me, and even if you wrote already, I'll send you all this stuff so you have it. I'll email it to you. And so more than half of all U.S. Christians attend churches with less than 99 people. So here's a graph that shows exactly the same thing. 7 to 99 is this. When you get up to 100 to 499 is this. When you get to 500 to 999 people is this. And when you look at what we call mega churches, they get all the attention. It's just that tiny little sliver of the pie. So if you're trying to run a business, what are you going to do?
59%.
That's where the money is.
Yeah.
Okay, so mega church, this is just not numbers, but just terminology. I already showed you the numbers. Mega church, what we call a mega church is one large church. Okay, we have this other term that we've come up with recently called multi-site. What that means is it's one large church that meets in several locations. Usually that means that I meet in one place, I have a video camera on me, and there's an auditorium someplace else where people go to church and they watch TV in church. Wayne Cordero does this, but he learned to turn the multi-site thing into church plants. Bill Hybels, on the other hand, builds buildings. They own buildings in 5 states that all watch Bill Hybels on TV. And Hybels is just about my age. So the writing's on the wall. There are going to be a lot of empty buildings sitting around someplace. So multi-church is a church that plants many separate churches. Now, this can be micro churches. It can be, Cordero will get a church going, get 500 people there, and then cut it loose, and maybe it shrinks to 400, but he's a multi-church pastor. Am I making sense when I say that? I really want you to get this idea. Multi-church is level 4 or level 5. And then a micro-church is something that starts intentionally small. It doesn't stay small necessarily, or it may stay small. To me, either if it stays small or grows large, if a micro-church grows into a multi-church, in other words, I'm pastoring 25 people, but we started 4 other churches of 20 people, then we're a multi-church, we're doing something good. If we grew to 1,000 and we didn't plant any other churches, it would be better if we planted more churches. So, go from there. So, focus. Any church can become a multi-church. If you have 20 people in your church, you can begin to plant more churches, and you can become multi-church. A micro-church requires no seminary, so no money, no salary, because you got a job, so no money, and if you're meeting in a house, no rent. So you can start a church with no money. I have a friend who is pastoring in Honolulu. He's an engineer. And the company he works for sends him traveling around the world. He travels more than I do. I travel about 12 trips a year. And so he's gone a lot. And we started a church, I don't know how many years ago, like 25 years ago. And it grew to about 140 people. That church, the pastor had to move to another state because his wife was getting sick. The humidity in Hawaii made her sick. And so he moved to Colorado. When he did, he divided the church up into micro churches. And all the people who are in that movement, the house church movement, they all say, you cannot take a regular kind of church and divide it into little churches. Most of them will die. And most did. 2 of them survived. One of them, when we started, joined us in Honolulu. So the other one is there, and it's been there for like 18 years. And sadly, they've never started another microchurch. But they're a church of about 30 people. The pastor's name is Wayne Ching. He's Chinese American. And we're trying to start, we've got one going in Las Vegas and one in Reno, Nevada. And we don't know what to do about money. Because in America, if you give money to a church, you get a tax write-off. So you have to have a denomination, or you have to become a nonprofit corporation to give the tax receipt. So we're struggling with how do you handle this, and so he didn't want to be Foursquare. Our church is an independent church. We don't want to become a denomination, so we didn't want him to join us. So we gave him $2,000 and said, go hire an attorney so you become an independent church. And he fooled around, didn't do it because his church is very small. Less than 20 people. So then finally I called him up and I go, you have to do this. He goes, I want to come under you. And I go, you can't. You have to to do this. And he goes, look, I read the papers. If we become a non-profit corporation, we have to have a treasurer. And he goes, the lowlifes coming to my church would steal all the money. Because that's who you want to reach with the gospel. So he's got strippers in his church. People who take their clothes off for money. He's got people who run gambling tables in his church. These people need Jesus, don't you agree?
Yes.
And so we're going around. So he and I both started going on Amazon, and we started reading all the books we could about house church to find out what do they do with money. And the nearest we could get was we started a bunch of house churches, and they all give money to the guy who started it. And so they made a corporation, whatever. We didn't want to do that. So I ran into Wayne Ching. And I go, you've been doing this for all this time. What do you do with money? And he goes, well, first is I teach people to tithe. Because you taught me that. I teach people to tithe. Almost every person in my church tithes. But I tell them, don't bring it here. We don't want it. So here's what you do. You open up a bank account, a checking account, that's in your name, and you tithe 10% of your income to that. And then whenever the Lord tells you to give money to churches in Mozambique, you give them money. Or if He tells you to pay the rent for the guy down the street who lost his job, you go tell him, Jesus told me to give you this money, here's $3,500 to take care of you and your family. And he says what's happened is every person in my church, or every family in my church, is a one person or one family missions agency. And then he said this, he goes, and as to the church's expenses, I pay for that out of my tithe. And he goes, you know what that means? I go, what? He goes, I buy styrofoam cups and coffee. And the rest of my money, I put in a checking account and I give it away to people in need. And he goes, the only thing it's cost us is we don't get money back on our income taxes. And we figure if we're giving the money to God, we don't care about our income taxes. Is that cool?
That's awesome.
I just told you how to start a church for zero money. See, the way we've always started churches is we send out 100 people, we give them a bunch of money, we advertise, we pay rent, we do all these things. You don't need it. With Facebook, you know, everybody has a Facebook account, right? You can create a Facebook page that's private, that only the people you let in can get in. So that can become your private tool for communicating with your people all the time. You can go on there anytime, any night of the time of night, whatever, and you can write stuff to your congregation and post it. You can put, if you want to do a teaching, just take your cell phone and talk to yourself, and then go put it on YouTube. We have churches that do that. We have one church that met as a group of micro churches. The pastor worked for Foursquare Missions and was traveling around the world, and he would every week take his phone and make a 20-minute sermon, and his people would gather together like this in small groups, and they would ask the same kind of questions we ask. That would be church, and they held together. If we get creative, and if we get our eyes off big and onto, we stop thinking elephant and we start thinking rabbit, then we can actually change the world in some pretty incredible ways. Does this make sense?
Yes.
I'm done.